Yo, what's going on guys, Vanity here. This week's tutorial is going to be on the Los Angeles based collective Soulection. Now Soulection is of course a collective of artists, producers and also DJs, so I think it would be unfair to kind of categorize all of their sounds under one musical umbrella, as I feel like each artist does have their own sound and they definitely bring something new to the collective. So for the purpose of this tutorial, I've made something that uses elements from each artist to produce a track that I could imagine, being associated with the Soulection brand. So the track, which I'll play in just a second, was produced in collaboration with an artist who goes by the name of Toland. Shout out to Toland if you're watching this. Links to his work will be in the description below. I say track, but it was more just kind of an idea that me and Toland were bouncing around, just the kind of vibe that we had. As you guys know, I'm more into producing sample-based hip-hop, but this sound certainly is very refreshing. Remember to check out the Soulection drum kit that I've put together. The link to that will be in the description below. And without further ado, let's get straight into this week's tutorial. Alright, so that's the track we're working with today. Hopefully that gave you a little bit more of an idea of the kind of sounds and characteristics I'll be going through. I want to say right now as well, this tutorial isn't going to be a sound design tutorial. I'm not going to be showing you how to create, Soulection chords or Soulection pads. The whole of this Sound Like tutorial series is about just deconstructing an artist's sound, so actually showing you inside of a project and trying to give a window into the sounds and the kind of almost characteristics of an artist's sound and style. So you can see here all of the sounds that we've got going on. There's a lot more inner works than there was in the Just Blaze tutorial. So I said this tutorial was going to lean slightly more to Esther's sound, but I think the characteristics I'm about to speak about can kind of be applied to each artist individually. For me anyway, in my mind, Esther's sound consists of heavy 808s with a ton of pitch modulation, so you can hear that I've got some pitch modulation going on in this 808, which I will go through in just a second. A snare that literally slaps you across the face, and I think is pretty much always the loudest element in all of his tracks. There's always lots of synths in all of Soulection's records, whether it's lush pads or kind of major chord progressions, and there's always a lot of synthesis going on in each of their records. I'm going to do a separate tutorial, or tutorial series actually, on sound design, and Soulection will be one of the episodes. The percussion is always quite interesting in Soulection records. There's always kind of a 16th of hi-hat pattern going on there. You've got lots of bongo drums, lots of tambourine hits, various percussion. Being from Los Angeles, all the tracks seem to have that kind of LA swing to them that pretty much all beat music has that comes out of California at the minute. I know that Esther uses Ableton like myself, as well as lots of Artaria plugins, Silent One, and some of the native instrument stuff. But he actually seems to do most of his processing with the kind of Ableton stock effects, which doesn't actually surprise me because I know how dope they are. It's just proving that you don't really need any fancy equipment or plugins to make dope music. So yeah, I want to get straight into the 808 on this track. I'll just play it for you soloed first. So the first thing you'll notice that's usually a big no-no when doing any bass is it's actually in stereo, not in mono. Now bass line should always be in mono if you want to keep the full kind of low end impact of the sound. As soon as you split it to stereo, you lose that. But this was just a creative decision. I just felt like it sounded better in stereo. If something's going to sound better that's kind of going against the grain, I'm happy to do that. And so that was just a kind of creative decision on my part. But you can see the processing on here. We've got just an 808 bass line in a sampler in Ableton. We've then got a compressor which is just sidechaining the kick to the bass. So the bass is creating a little bit of space for the kick drum to come through. Simple EQ. I've then got a max bass in stereo, which is something that I pretty much use all the time on my bass lines. Now max bass essentially adds upper harmonics or frequencies so that the bass tone can be heard on speakers that don't have the capabilities to reproduce, really low end frequencies. So you can see here what it's adding in here. And you can also solo out the different channels. So if we played just the max bass on its own, so this is the bass that it's adding in. We can then listen to the original bass, so without the bass that it's adding in. And then audio is just listening to them both together. So you can see it makes quite a big difference. I've then got our bass, which is another little secret weapon. This just enhances the bass, makes it a lot fatter, a lot thicker. It's essentially just a compressor, but it's a real nice compressor. You can hear the difference that's making instantly. I've then got an EQ again, which is just rolling off the upper portion of the frequencies. Usually I would roll off around 100, but because of the kind of tonality of this 808, I've actually left a lot more in than I would usually. Again, it was just a creative decision. I just felt it sounded nice like that. There's nothing too much I can say about that other than just experiment with your plugins. Don't necessarily just always default to cutting everything over 100 off, because sometimes it can sound a lot better if you don't actually do that. So bear that in mind. And then I've just got a simple EQ. Simple compressor, sorry, not an EQ. What am I going on about? Which is just doing -3 dBs of reduction just to make it a little bit more solid, just squishing it into place, so it's kind of providing the foundation of the low end in this record. So as far as the pitch modulation goes, all it is, it's actually very simple. All you need to make sure you do, if you're using a sampler or software instrument, make sure you have one note that's essentially sitting on top of another note. So you can see here I've got a note on D sharp, and then I've got another one that's hitting on D2. As long as it's in key, it'll have the same effect. And you know how you can hear the bass line sliding up and down? Well, that's done through portamento. So on your sampler or software instrument, whatever you may be using, there should be a parameter for portamento, or it might be called slide. It depends what software instrument you are using, but usually it's called, or the technical name for it is portamento. And it essentially allows the 808 to slide between notes, and that's what gives it that effect. It's not actually done through automating the pitch like a lot of people believe. And the 808 is as simple as that. I am actually going to do a separate video that I think may be out next week. It depends on my kind of scheduling. That is going to be all about how to make really fat 808 sounds and how to, tweak them and automate the pitch and get really interesting results with the bass. So that's going to be an interesting video if you want to learn more about the kind of Soulection bass sound. So that's as far as the bass goes. It isn't too interesting. It's just about the portamento on your software instrument. Just make sure the portamento is turned on. And usually you want it turned to about 50%, maybe 100. It depends how much slide you're looking for. But again, it's just something you want to experiment with. So as far as the kick and snare go, got a really simple pattern going on. Because there's so much movement in the 808, I didn't really feel it was necessary to kind of put any swing on the drums. Putting swing on would have enhanced the track a little bit maybe. It's probably something you should experiment with, but I just felt like there was already a lot of movement going on in the 808, so I didn't feel like I wanted to add any swing onto the drums. But again, as I said at the start, this was just an idea, so it's not anything that's been kind of completed. It was just a skeleton beat, as I like to call them. The drums are obviously influenced by Dilla, influenced from that old school kind of hip hop sound, the Neptunes, etc. Make sure you're using kind of short clap hits and using that rim shot snares. So if I go back onto the drum pattern I'll solo out the snare. So a way to get the snares a little bit tighter if they're not already tight enough is to pull up a transient shaper. I like to use the Native Instruments Transient Master. You then have 3 options. The gain is self-explanatory. You've got the attack, which will boost the initial transient of the sound. So listen to this. You see what it's doing there? But the more noticeable thing is the sustain. So for a tighter sound, you actually want to pull it down, which means it's essentially reducing the transient of the sound. Which in non-technical terms is essentially making the sound shorter and a lot more snappier. So if I find a snare drum that I like, but the tail is a little bit long, I'll pull down the snare, and I'll usually boost the attack just a little bit. So you can hear how it's making it a little bit tighter and a little bit quieter as well. So I'll just play in the context of the whole record. So that's definitely something to have a play with, is actually changing the transients of the sounds. As far as processing goes on the drums, it's very simple. Just your standard kind of EQ and your compressor. Nothing too fancy there. Obviously I go over that in every single tutorial I do, so I don't want to bore you to death with the basics. The snare, as always, I've got my favourite Pultec EQ on it. Boosting 6 dB at 60 Hz and then reducing it by 6. So I'll solo the kick. It was already a pretty low frequency center kick, but I just wanted to enhance that even more with this EQ. But the sample pack that I've produced to sit alongside this tutorial is full of all these kind of hits, you know, low end kick drums, lots of really sharp dynamic snares that are both rim shots, snaps, claps, and just your standard straight snare hits that have all been, you know, run through transient designers just to get them as tight as possible and get them kind of as punchy as possible as well, but mainly just to get them in the style of Soulection. So just sounds that I could imagine, you know, Soulection producers actually using in their records. But if I play it all together. We've got this as well. I'm not sure where this guitar came from. Actually, Toland added that in. I think it's probably just a loop from somewhere, but I'm not 100% sure. This pad's quite interesting. So this was a pad loop that we took. It's then been chopped up and rearranged, and each one has been pitched up and down different amounts. So you can see that first one there is pitched down 7 semitones. This one's pitched down 4 semitones, 2 semitones. Then it goes up 2 again, down 7, down 4, down 2, and then up 2. So it just loops around. The other main aspect in this was the bongo loop, I think. Yeah. Again, that's literally just a loop straight out of a sample pack, I'm not even going to lie. We've then got these claps that are building in pitch and kind of length towards the second drop. That second drop is really bad though, it needs some work. So yeah, that's everything I wanted to say about Soulection. Like I said, I will be releasing another video that will cover the sound design portion of a typical Soulection record. I do feel that the Soulection sound is way more based on synths and kind of, you know, building sounds than it is, you know, just drums and bass. So that tutorial will be a lot more in depth. I'll be showing you how to actually create kind of synths, pads, etc. from the scratch. How to actually play them, you know, what chords work, what typical chords you could hear in a Soulection track. Just so you have an idea of what works, and then you kind of have a foundation from which you can evolve and build your own tracks on top of. Thanks for watching this, guys. If you have enjoyed, please like, subscribe, and drop a comment below. Let me know any feedback you may have or any suggestions for future tutorials. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next one.